Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Shorts episode number 33. Emily Claughton. In the Narrabri Northwestern Courier on the 23rd of December 1926, there was an article titled Rich Estate. Probate has been granted in the will of Miss Emily Claughton of Elwood, Victoria, formerly of Hay, New South Wales. After specified legacies and testatrix bequests, the residue of her estate was valued at £159,731. The testatrix was 77 years of age and bequeathed £1,000 each to the trustees of the Church of England property in the Diocese of Riverina and the Presbyterian Church at Hay for the establishment of bonuses to be known as G.G. Claughton bonuses. The income to be applied towards the maintenance and support of boys at a hostel establishment by the said churches or education department at Hay while attending the local high school. She bequeathed the income of a gift of £1,000 to the trustees of church property in the Diocese of Riverina, to the vicar for the time being of the Church of England at Hay, and the income from a similar amount to the minister of the Presbyterian Church at Hay. £300 to the trustee of the Salvation Army to invest and pay the income thereof to the officer in charge at Hay for the general purposes of the Army. £500 to the Bishopric Endowment Fund of the Diocese of Riverina, £2,000 each to the trustees of Hay and Echuca, and £2,000 upon trust, the income of which was to be paid to the Hay Committee of the Red Cross Society for the maintenance of a maternity house in that town. Subject to these bequests and a large number of specific legacies, the testatrix bequeathed the residue of her estate to her trustees upon trust for investment, the income to be applied towards the maintenance of such hospitals and other institutions now or hereinafter to be provided for blinded, disabled or incurable soldiers, sailors and nurses in New South Wales and Victoria, provided that if such hospitals or institutions had been discontinued, or in the opinion of their trustees they did not require the said income or any part of it, the whole of the income was to be applied to the maintenance of any hospitals or benevolent institutions managed by the Church of England or Presbyterian Church in New South Wales and Victoria, as the trustees thought fit. So who was Emily Claughton? How did she come to be so wealthy, and why did she have no bequests to any family members? Well, Emily Claughton was born on the 21st of October 1848 at Yeadon in Yorkshire, England. Her father was Gregson Claughton and her mother Sarah Clapham. She had two older siblings, Mary and George. Mary stayed in England and she died in Yorkshire in 1904 at the age of 59. Her parents married in 1845 in Yorkshire, where Gregson was a cloth manufacturer. The family immigrated to Australia on the Norfolk in 1869 and lived in Echuca, Victoria, where Gregson's brother James lived. It seems that Mary lived with her grandparents rather than emigrate to Australia. Gregson Claughton is listed in Echuca South as having 78 acres of land. Gregson Claughton passed away at Kew at the age of 53 years. The year after her husband's death, Sarah Claughton was listed on the 1st of November 1880 as taking over the ownership of that land in Echuca South as the administratrix of G. Claughton, deceased. However, only a little less than 3 years later, Sarah passed away in Moama at the age of 57 years on the 6th of August 1883. Emily married Otto Hugo Alexander Beschman Baden von Strands on the 20th of January 1870 at the St Stephen's Church of England in Richmond, Victoria. Emily was 21 and Otto 48. Otto was German and they had a son, George Sidney Strands, in 1870 in Richmond. However, he died on the 23rd of December 1871. In 1875, Otto was living in Sydney under the name of Baron Otto von Strands. Otto died in London in June 1878 when he was 56. At the time of Otto's death, Emily was a housekeeper employed by her brother, George Gregson Claughton, the G.G. Claughton that was mentioned earlier. He was born on the 22nd of August 1846 at Otley, Yorkshire, West Riding, England. On the 31st of March 1881 in the Echuca Riverine Herald. Presentation to Mr. Claughton. During the sittings of the Echuca Shire Council at Rochester on Tuesday, the ordinary business was suspended for a brief term to allow of the presentation of a testimonial to Mr. G. Claughton. For 8 years, Mr. Claughton filled the position of valuer and rate collector, a position from which he retired from 2 or 3 months ago for the purpose of establishing, in conjunction with Mr. Gavel, scouring works at Moama. In accepting Mr. Claughton's resignation, the council decided that a testimonial should be presented to him in recognition of the zeal and fidelity in which he had discharged his duties. Those duties certainly could not be called pleasant ones. They were such as were calculated to bring an officer in collision with the ratepayers unless great discretion was used, and it was greatly to the credit of Mr. Claughton that while he carried out his duties most faithfully to the Shire, scarcely a complaint had ever been made against him by the ratepayers. The testimonial bore the signatures of all of the members and of the secretary, and the corporal seal was affixed. 3 years after her husband Otto's death, on the 15th of August 1881, there was a photo of Emily, and it was signed by herself, and on the rear of the photo it says, "With dearest love from Emily." This photo was taken in Paris, and the photo was sent to Sweden. However, there doesn't seem to be anything further uncovered from that. On the 27th of December 1889 in the Echuca Riverine Herald, the wool washing establishment of Mr. Claughton, situated on the New South Wales side of the Murray River, about 7 miles upstream, was destroyed by fire yesterday afternoon. The fire was burning very freely when the excursion steamers came downstream last evening, and from what we can gather, the cause of the fire is unknown. Some of the wool recovered from the Willandra wreck was at the wash, being scoured, and this was destroyed. The owner will be of a severe loss as he was not insured, his policy having recently expired. The season was almost over for Mr. Claughton, and he did not think it necessary to renew it this year. George Gregson Claughton passed away on the 26th of March 1912 in South Yarra. He did not marry or have any children, and he was aged 63. The Hay Riverine Grazier outlined his death. Mr. George Gregson Claughton of Czar Lodge Hay and Yeadon Station died this morning at Melbourne, where he'd been spending the summer months and seeking medical advice. He was a native of Yorkshire and first came to the Hay district as a buyer of stock for his boiling down establishment at Moama, and he travelled by coach over a greater part of the Riverina. He was a good buyer, and sheep breeders were always ready to do business with him. He bought very largely of surplus sheep of the Hay, Hillston and Ivanhoe districts during the years before the drought, and in the early 1890s he purchased the hay works from Corrigan, McClure and Gibson and continued to work them until the increased price of stock made boiling down unprofitable. In the meantime, he got together the well-known property of Yeadon by buying out a number of selectors, and this property he continued to work to the present time. He also bought Czar Lodge and took up his residence with his sister, Miss Claughton, at Hay, where he made many friends who will learn of his death with keen regret. The deceased gentleman was unmarried. Mr. Claughton took little interest in public affairs, but he was very fond of gardening, and when the Horticultural Society was in its fullest vigour, he was one of its best supporters and most successful exhibitors. He was one of the oldest magistrates in the district. The funeral of the deceased gentleman will take place in Melbourne on Thursday. And on the 24th of July 1912, in the Casino and Kyogle Courier and North Coast Advertiser in New South Wales, the estate of the late Mr. George Gregson Claughton, grazier of Hay, which he bequeathed wholly to his sister, Emily von Strands, wife of Otto von Strands, who was appointed sole executrix. The probate's net value of the estate was sworn in at £48,333, of which £24,248 and 12 shillings was real estate. And on the 25th of September 1912 in the Government Gazette, probate jurisdiction in New South Wales, in the will of George Gregson Claughton, late of Hay, in the state of New South Wales, grazier, deceased, was granted on the 20th of June 1912 to Emily von Strands, otherwise known as Emily Claughton, of Hay, married woman. And on the 21st of July 1917 in the Bendigo Independent, marriage declared void after 47 years, adventurous German story, from Melbourne. The time of the Chief Justice, Sir John Madden, was occupied for over 2 hours this morning in the hearing of a petition by Emily von Strands of Williamstown for a dissolution of her marriage with Otto von Strands on the grounds of desertion, and alternatively on the grounds of nullity of the marriage because the respondent at the time of the ceremony had a wife living in Germany. The evidence was of a most interesting character. Emily von Strands, the petitioner, said she was born in Yorkshire 66 years ago and came to Australia by the ship Norfolk in 1869. She became acquainted with the respondent during the voyage. On board, he told her his name was Otto Bardo, but a few weeks after they landed, he said it was Otto Bardo von Strands. The story he related to her was that he was a native of Germany, where he was interested in several large estates. He said his home was a large one, surrounded by trees, which stood back from a spacious garden on the banks of the Spree in Berlin. He had fought a duel with a lieutenant in the German army who had insulted his sister, and having defeated him was exiled from the country. The petitioner understood that the respondent had stated that the lieutenant was a nephew of Count Bismarck, and that was the reason for his trip to Australia. Evidence was given that she fell in love with Otto and on arriving in Australia married him against the advice of her friends. The petitioner and respondent married in Melbourne in January 1870. He signed the marriage lines as Otto von Strands, and when she referred to the name he had previously given her, he said it was all right. His father was von Strands and his mother, the Countess Marie von Strands, who had estates in Germany from which he received £1,000 a year. After the marriage, they stayed at various hotels at Brighton and Williamstown, a home not having been established, as the respondent had expressed his intention of travelling the world with her. One morning in March 1870, the respondent went away, stating he would return later in the day, but she heard nothing of him until 3 weeks later, when she received a letter from him through a friend of his. He was in Sydney. Some months later, a friend of the respondent named Glasbrunner, whose brother had returned to Germany, wrote to her stating that his brother had communicated with him, asking him to tell the petitioner, if she'd not already done so, not to marry the respondent, as he'd deserted his wife and family in Germany, and he was not the man that he represented himself to be. The writer from Germany had formerly lived in Ballarat, and the petitioner had been introduced to him prior to his return. He knew of her engagement to the respondent. She immediately wrote to the respondent and he returned from Sydney. He asked her if she believed what she had been told, and she replied no, that she did not think he would be such a villain. However, he would not deny that he was already married and would not give her any proof. Subsequently, he said, "I am married, but I'm proud to call you my wife." In the absence of satisfactory proof, she refused to live with him. A heated argument followed, during which he exclaimed, "You have made your bed, and on it you will have to lay. You can go to the devil." The petitioner went away, and the respondent had not seen him since. Later she heard he'd returned to Germany. Public family trees have Otto marrying Juana Icade Y.S. in Europe, and they had a daughter, Marta von Strands. She was now seeking a dissolution of her marriage because she did not like having to carry the name. Adolphine Buhlmann, who stated her age as 81 years, said she was the sister of Adolf Glasbrunner, who had revealed the respondent's identity to the petitioner 47 years ago. She had known the respondent in Berlin and knew the house in the garden on the Spree he referred to. That is over 60 years old, she said, as she handed to his honour a card printed in German in which the respondent invited her to attend the christening of his second child in Berlin. She attended the christening and well remembered the feast that followed. The papers show that the respondent was born in 1823 and if he is still living would be 94 years of age. His honour granted a decree nisi on the ground of nullity of marriage, the respondent having a wife living in Germany at the time he went through the marriage in Melbourne with the petitioner. Emily was unaware of Otto's whereabouts at the time of the decree nisi, but as you would have heard earlier, he had passed away in Germany back in 1878. In the divorce petition in Victoria, it says, "I, Emily von Strands of Theona in Morris Street, Williamstown, on oath say that on the 20th day of January 1870, I went through a marriage with Otto von Strands at St. Stephen's Church in Richmond by Reverend Vans, according to the rites of the Church of England. The respondent on the 5th of July 1870, without just cause or excuse, wilfully deserted me, and without any such cause or excuse, left me continually deserted for 3 years and upwards. Prior to the marriage, he said he was born in Berlin in 1820. I believe that he was domiciled in Victoria at the time of the desertion. However, I am unable to say where he is at present living. I am 66 years of age and was born in Yorkshire, England on the 20th of October 1851, and at the time of the marriage and de facto still domiciled in Victoria. Prior to my marriage, I was a spinster and resided with and maintained by my parents, and subsequent to my marriage, I was maintained partly by my parents and partly by the respondent up until the time of his desertion of me. Since the desertion, I've been maintained by my parents until the death of my mother on the 4th of August 1884, and was thereafter employed as a housekeeper to my brother until his death on the 26th of March 1912, when I was left a considerable sum of money, making me independent. The respondent prior to the marriage represented himself as a bachelor of independent means with no occupation, and subsequent to his marriage until his desertion of me had no occupation. I'm unable to state his means of livelihood. There are no children alive born of the marriage. Immediately after the celebration of the marriage, the respondent and I lived and cohabited together for a week at my parents' house in Grove Street, Richmond, then for a month at the Pier Hotel in Williamstown, then at the Railway Hotel at Brighton for a week, then at my parents' home until the 20th of March 1870, when we went again to the Pier Hotel in Williamstown and lived and cohabited there until the 25th of March 1870, when the respondent left me to go to Sydney on business. I returned to my parents' home. Previous to my marriage, the respondent introduced me to some friends of his, whose names I do not know, who were then on the point of departure to Germany. These friends, after their arrival in Germany, wrote to some relations of the respondent in Dalesford by the name of Glassbrunner, telling them to find out and advise me not to marry the respondent. So his first wife that he married in Germany was Franziska Mathilde Emily Anna Clara August von Strands. I was told by Mr. Glassbrunner that he was already married and had a wife and family living in Germany. At the beginning of July 1870, Mr. Glassbrunner visited my father, bringing a letter with him. The respondent was still absent in Sydney. I wrote to the respondent and asked him to come to Melbourne as I had something important to ask him. He arrived at my parents' home where I was staying on the 5th of July 1870. I told him in full of what I had been informed. I asked him if it was true that he had a wife and children in Germany when he married me. He said he would not explain anything. I told him that unless he would give me a satisfactory answer, I could no longer live with him. He would not tell me whether it was true or not, and said, "Put on your things and come away down to Williamstown." I said, "You couldn't expect me to. You would be the first to turn around and say I didn't care whether you were married or not, so long as you gave me money." He said, "Well, you can stay here and go to the devil if you like." He then left me, and I've never seen him since. I was informed and believe that inquiries were instituted by my parents with a view to tracing the respondent in Victoria and in Sydney after the desertion took place, but without success. I do not know the whereabouts of the letter referred to, and my father and Mr. Glassbrunner are now deceased. A deed of separation has never been executed. My reason for not having previously instituted proceedings is that up to the year 1889, desertion alone was not a sufficient cause for the granting of a divorce, and prior to the 26th day of March 1912, when my brother died, leaving me considerable means, I had not the means to take out the proceedings, as I was only allowed bare household expenses. When my brother died, his estate was a very large one, and as executrix, I was very busy for some time in attending to it. Since the war broke out, I've been putting off taking proceedings as I believed I acquired a German nationality by my marriage with the respondent and was frightened of the publicity that this would cause. So Emily's obituary was placed in the Riverine Herald in Echuca on the 28th of August 1926. A former resident of Echuca, in the person of Miss Emily Claughton of Yeadon Station, New South Wales, died at Rowensfield Private Hospital in St Kilda on Wednesday at the age of 70 years. The deceased was a sister of the late G.G. Claughton, with whom she resided in Echuca for many years. For 30 years prior to her death, she lived at Hay, where she established the Emily Scholarship for Girls, attending the Hay War Memorial High School. 3 years ago, she gave her home, Czar Lodge, to the Presbyterian Church to be used as a home for boys attending the high school and primary schools. The late Miss Claughton, by her generous nature and kindly and unassuming disposition, gained a large circle of friends who sincerely mourn her death. The remains were brought to Echuca yesterday by train and laid to rest in the family grave in the Presbyterian section of the cemetery. Gregson Claughton's brother James is also buried in the family plot, and it simply says uncle of George Gregson Claughton. James Claughton was born in 1834 in Yorkshire, England. On the 13th of January 1862 in the Melbourne Argus, it says dissolution of partnership, the partnership existing between James Claughton and William Guthridge as quartz crushers at Inglewood, carried under the style and firm of J. Claughton and Company, has been dissolved by mutual consent. On the 23rd of April 1862 in the Maryborough and Dunley Advertiser, there's a notice that we have this day applied for a lease of 2 acres on the ground situated at the Crown and Kettle Reef at Balaclava, and it's signed by James Fisher of Balaclava and James Claughton of Inglewood. On the 4th of January 1866, he's with C. Ebsworth. They have purchased land at Maxwell's Reef in Inglewood. And on the 23rd of July 1866 at Mariner's Reef, he has 15 acres of mining land. James Claughton died in Echuca on the 30th of April 1872 at the Bridge Hotel. He was only 38 years old. So I hope you enjoyed the story on Emily Claughton and how she came to have such a large estate that she's distributed to good causes. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.